Hey everybody, in case you were bored and you wanted some Command and Conquer action, I got yourself some games that might interest you actually. So, starting off from the top of the list, and really I'm just going in no particular order, if you guys are interested in Command and Conquer, you might be interested in Endwar. It's like this alternate history situation in which Russia, the EU, and the United States are fighting all at the same time. So, if you do like multiple nations fighting each other, this would, in a modern sort of warfare setting, kind of reminiscent of Zero Hour, that I think you would love this game, albeit Endwar is very different in that there's no MCV, there's no construction of bases, you just requisition units, and then you get them onto the battlefield. So it is very much different in terms of gameplay to that of Command and Conquer, but in terms of the military simulator and as well as the battles between this alternate history sort of future version of the planet that is reminiscent of Red Alert, obviously, then I think you would really like Endwar, especially with the fact that it's very low key in terms of the alternate history. You're not going to see any Tesla towers, but you will see railguns. Next on the chopping block would be Active War. Now, if you like sort of the futuristic sci-fi action that goes on with Endwar, you would like Active War. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Endwar. Instead, there's different factions, there's prisoners, and then later on there's also the fact that the buildings themselves, they could be constructed with like bulldozers and whatever the equivalent for each of the factions, so you can build a sprawling base in comparison to Endwar, where it's kind of restricted. You can only construct units, and a lot of the cool game mechanics that you'll see in active aggression also appear in this game, with you being able to obtain prisoners, for example, which is really cool. You just sort of beat up all these vehicles and then all the prisoners pop up and then you use them for extra income. And I think if you like the near future action and the I guess the realistic sort of time period, then I think you will love active aggression as well as this one, Active War. But for now, we're getting ahead of ourselves with active aggression. We got to talk about the next one. Next would be Ruse. So if you enjoyed Wargame Red Dragon, you will enjoy Ruse. And Ruse has a lot more base building as well as like sort of different units than that of Wargame. So I found that indeed like Ruse kind of shared more with Command & Conquer than Wargame. Really the fact that you can construct bases is kind of like the thing that kind of defines them both. And I think Ruse is an interesting sort of deception RTS game where you try and sort of create decoys and learn about your enemy strategies before you ever engage them, with the battlefield sort of reminiscent of Wargame in that there is an ultra realistic portrayal of World War II, but there's also like some futuristic goofy shit, like there's the artillery unit that fires nukes, for example, or there's like future tech as well that you can sort of add in there of what if the Allies had like nukes, or what if the Axis had nukes. And I think if you do like alternate history, and if you also like sort of grand scale World War II battles, I think this would be a clear choice for you. But I gotta give it for the base building, as unlike Wargame, there's a large amount of bases that you can actually construct in Ruse. Okay, this one is cheating, but Openra, it's basically a mod and remake of Command & Conquer 1 to make it run on all systems, to make it run in 4K as well as in full screen, to allow you to play the original Command & Conquer with a bunch of tweaks and balances. And I think that if you are truly a fan of Command & Conquer, Openra is really the best game for you, and it's currently free. So you can play the original Command & Conquer 1 for completely free, and you can play with all sorts of different mods and changes that allow you to play different stuff as well. So for example, there's a Red Alert 2 mod that's in development. There is also various like different game modes which allows you to verse off against zombies, as well as have like different situations and different sort of scenarios that you can have in this game. There are a multitude of different ways to play, but if you just want to play a base Command & Conquer 1 experience, Openra is free and it's available to play on all systems. Okay, Halo Wars. It's basically my favorite console RTS game, and I think in terms of Command & Conquer, you construct bases. They're not really free bases. There's bases in different areas and locked to different like certain positions, but there are you can build as many units as you want in certain game modes, but there are a variety of units like air units, land units, and vehicular units, all from the Halo universe. And if you want a quintessential Halo strategy game experience, Halo Wars is really your best bet for like a solid campaign that you can love. Halo Wars 2 also is a great game that I would recommend, but Halo Wars 2 is also only on Windows Store, so it's a little bit of a bitch to get running. But Halo Wars is currently on Steam, and again, if you want a standard and awesome RTS experience in the Halo universe, Halo Wars is really your best bet. So next would be 8-bit Armies, and 8-bit Armies, as well as 8-bit Invaders and 8-bit Hordes, is basically the same sort of 8-bit strategy. You construct one structure at a time to expand out your base, and it's kind of like an MCV in which you construct defenses as well as regular primary buildings, but it's locked in place, right? And also in the Invaders game, you can play with these super units as well. Now, I say Armies, Hordes, and Invaders because the 8-bit series is divided up into 3 games, and I'm not really a big fan of this, but it does create an experience where you're fighting against a replica of the Command and Conquer Armies and stuff, when you having, these realistic military portrayals of armies. And then also you have Hordes, which are just medieval and fantasy, and then you have Invaders, which are sci-fi armies. Now, I wouldn't recommend this game unless it was on sale, because there are like a lot of games to pick up in order to get all the factions. But if you just want to play the modern military or somewhat futuristic military RTS factions, just pick Armies. Just pick 8-bit Armies. Next would be Supreme Commander 2, and I say Supreme Commander 2 over Supreme Commander 1 because the economy in Supreme Commander 1 is very different to that of Supreme Commander 2, whereas Supreme Commander 2 you build and then that's basically it. That one-time purchase is basically all you have to worry about, whereas Command and Conquer, or not Command and Conquer, the Supreme Commander is more of a streaming sort of like production where you're constantly putting in resources into a unit. And Command and Conquer is more of the, you spend resources on something and then you're done. In Supreme Commander, basically, you have a humongous amount of options as well as large-scale armies. It's a little bit wonkier than that of Supreme Commander 1, but it is closer to that of Command & Conquer in terms of its gameplay. And really, you just have one commander goofing around and constructing a bunch of shit here and there, so it is honestly like a really great experience to just have like these giant armies, and you gotta just keep your commander safe. So it's kind of like an MCV in that fashion. In fact, the Supreme Commander series is probably the closest to having an MCV in RTS games. Next would be Grey Goo, a game that I really thought would be the next sort of Command and Conquer, but really did kind of fail. But it's similar in a lot of ways. It's a little bit weird though. The MCV sort of construction situation, that's kind of the same for some of the factions. The Goo create their own units, right? This is a completely separate faction where you can walk all over terrain and you can just become giant blobs, and those blobs form units. And that's one of the interesting things, is that there's one faction that forms units from blobs, there's another faction that has like an MCV type superstructure. In fact, there's 3 factions like this, and they have different build styles. So one of them uses modules and like connects to these modules in order to construct buildings. One of them has like a grid where you put like buildings inside a grid to construct buildings, and one of them has like a pylon thing similar to StarCraft. And in a lot of ways, if you love Command & Conquer, the game is very similar to that of Command & Conquer with base building and armies, and it's super futuristic. It's not at all like near military, somewhat realistic future. It's like full on future. And if you love the sci-fi aspect of Command & Conquer, you would love this, as this is just a giant push, so to speak. And in comparison, I guess like Supreme Commander is definitely not more realistic, but Supreme Commander definitely is more large scale. Finally, Active Aggression. This is a somewhat similar to, like I said, Active War. It is a near futuristic RTS game with modern, realistic sort of factions. So you have US Army, you have the Cartel, and then you have the EU, and they all have different special characteristics about them. You can capture prisoners just like in Active War. It's like you have different separate smaller builders that are used to construct like different buildings and bases and stuff, and then you have a large assortment of units that are all somewhat realistic, like the Abrams tanks, and then you have like railguns, for example. And I think ultimately, when it comes down to a somewhat like trying to get the same similar gameplay as Command & Conquer, Active Aggression would try and do this, but because it's a little bit more hyper realistic, units are less tankier and are less they're more real than that of Command and Conquer Zero Hours or any of the Command and Conquers in terms of their movement and stuff. It's very much plays like Wargame and Ruse, but without the aspect of hiding, and more of a top-down view instead of a scaled-down view. So it's more reminiscent to Command and Conquer. But that would be my list. What do you guys think? Let me know what you guys want to see, and also let me know what kind of games you would put on this list. Bye bye, and see you next time.